I will be talking about consciousness. There have been new breakthroughs in science, in neuroscience, and in our understanding of the universe, which now give us a unified scientific understanding of what consciousness is and how it emerges, and also to reconcile what we thought was irreconcilable in the past, the idea of soul and the function of the brain and physics. We can understand how they fit together, how we don't have to have a war between these viewpoints. Above all, I will start with the discussion of neuroscience, about new breakthroughs, which Yeshua and I have been part of, which give us a scientific understanding of how consciousness emerges in the brain. And I'll have 10 slides on that, 12 slides on the soul. But first, I want to put in a caveat. The very first slide reminds us that each of us is more than just a consciousness, more than just a brain and a soul. There are other aspects which need to be considered in areas like healing of our bodies, healing of our communities. I will not have time to talk about those very important details because it will be challenging enough in about 10 minutes to explain what we now know about brains, how consciousness emerges in brains at a certain level, and how this connects with the idea of the soul. So let me begin with the brain part. When gurus talk to neuroscientists to try to get a story on what is consciousness, they are often frustrated for good reason. Neuroscience is almost like a gigantic factory where there are many specializations, and many people only know their own job, and their job is an important piece, but there are many, many specialties. There are some people who believe that the human brain is just a collection of specific apps. People will spend their whole life studying one little piece of the brain, and they will do important work. We need to know all these pieces. But these kinds of efforts remind me of the people who did leaf collecting back before the time of Charles Darwin. They thought of the study of life as a collection of lots and lots of leaves, but they didn't see the pattern. They didn't understand how they fit together. But in the last century, there was a major breakthrough in our understanding of neuroscience, as important as Darwin. There was a great neuroscientist, Carl Lashley, L-A-S, Lashley. And Lashley should be known to anyone well-trained in neuroscience today. Maybe he was the founder of systems neuroscience, the understanding of the brain as a whole system. And what Lashley said was the brain is not just a collection of inherited behaviors. After all, we can learn new behaviors. If all we did was have a collection of inherited behaviors and never learned anything, we would not be intelligent. We would not be conscious. We would be like robots following a program. Lashley said, no, let us understand how the brain works as a universal learning machine. And he formulated something called the principle of mass action. His two most important followers, I believe, were Carl Pribram and Walter Freeman. Before they died a few years ago, I was glad to partner with them. I believe they were the two leading systems neuroscientists in the world, students of Lashley, and they developed this principle of mass action much further. If you go to Google Scholar, you can see Freeman's work on mass action. And there's a previous YouTube, which Yeshua recorded, where we discuss these guys in great detail. So if the brain is a universal learning machine, and if our consciousness is a universal learning ability, a mind, what is it learning? Well, we have to understand that the brain evolved in biology to create action. Some people call it squeezing and squirting. okay? The brain as a whole system learns to come up to learn with a policy of action, which leads to better results as the organism judges the results. So we have a whole new mathematics of brain-like intelligent control, which connects directly to what we understand about the brain. There's now a kind of integration of artificial systems, which learn the same kind of task and what we see in the brain. Now, when we talk about consciousness and intelligence, it's very important that consciousness is not some kind of uniform liquid. Consciousness or intelligence, it's not like water where you have a certain quantity of it and it's the same thing. There are levels and levels of intelligence in reality, in nature. And these are not the only forms of intelligence out there. But if we look to nature, what really exists, we see there's a certain level of consciousness or intelligence in reptiles, in birds, in mammals. Humans fit in here, maybe beyond. And to learn more about these levels of consciousness, this is a very important link to the first International Conference on Consciousness, where they asked me to give a plenary. And there are many definitions of what the word consciousness means. And many of those definitions are useful. But I focus most on this definition, consciousness qua intelligence or mind, trying to understand how does intelligence work, how does mind work, and the other forms of consciousness tend to be attributes or consequences of this more universal character of intelligent systems or mind. In order to carry this further, when I was working with Freeman and Pribram, I was also working at the National Science Foundation. And this is one of the things I am most proud of. I set up major dialogues all across all the research programs funded by the National Science Foundation. And we worked together to come up with a common research agenda. What do we understand about how brains work to achieve results? And how can we build the same things? And how can we use these insights in artificial intelligence systems? If you go to the NSF webpage, search on the letters COPN, and you will see the best manifesto on understanding the brain, which exists anywhere even today. I have been keeping up. This manifesto on the NSF webpage is still the best guide to understanding how brains work, what we know, what we don't know, how to use the knowledge, and what lies underneath it. In 10 minutes, I can't describe all the principles, but let me say there are two major areas, prediction and decision. And the brain is a decision-making system. It learns to maximize a kind of telos. This fits Aristotle's idea of telos. But Aristotle's idea of telos or purpose was developed much further by the great mathematician von Neumann. We use his mathematics today to understand circuits in the brain. And one of the things we claim is we have a new branch of mathematics or engineering called adaptive dynamic programming, which explains how brains translate inborn values or feelings into operational values, which then guide our actions. Based on this mathematics, we have developed a whole roadmap of levels and levels of intelligence. Just as there are levels of consciousness out there in the animal world, in the mathematics and engineering, we now have a pathway which has been published and followed up on in engineering for how to go up from the primitive kinds of artificial intelligence that exists today, the very best of it, all the way up to the level of the mammal brain. And we now begin to understand how mammal brains actually generate consciousness or awareness. We have a mathematical theory of how it works, how it fits the circuits, and how to replicate. We know how consciousness works at the level of the mammal brain. This is a fundamental new breakthrough. This breakthrough was rooted in neuroscience. Prediction is half of this new theory of consciousness. And this prediction half has been verified in enormous mathematical detail. And in order to verify the whole model, Yeshua and I did an analysis of the very best real-time brain data now in existence. And you can see that it's in open access. We tested this new understanding of consciousness against the older Hebbian type theories. There are older models of consciousness. There are mathematical models which assume that the brain is nothing but a memory machine or a collection of apps. We did empirical tests on the best data showing that the new model, the brain as an intelligent conscious system, fits actual brain data much better than any of the other models. This is the beginning of a whole new science. We have not finished it. Every day I try to get somebody to fill in more because we've just begun a whole new world. It is a lot like Darwin. We've begun a whole new world. But now, this is the bigger picture. We know there are levels and levels of consciousness or intelligence, and we understand the mathematical principles. We have risen up to where we can begin to build mouse-level intelligent systems in computers, but we've also begun to understand why humans are more than your average mouse. We've begun to understand the function of mirror neurons and how they contribute to the power of the system. But are there higher levels of intelligence? And it turns out there are, and we have mathematics related to them. When I was young, I did not believe that there were higher levels of intelligence beyond the mammal brain. Besides Pribram and Freeman, the other most famous follower of Carl Lashley was a guy named Donald Hebb. And some people believe that this book by Hebb is the Bible for neural networks. I think John von Neumann had a better Bible, but this is a kind of Old Testament in the neural network field. And I'm very glad I read that book because the engineers who apply Hebbian learning, they should read the book because Hebb had much deeper insight than what they're implementing today. One of the key principles Hebb enunciated was Bayesian learning, which is important. And he said, if you're trying to test the probability that a theory is true based on experience, use Bayes' formula. You multiply the likelihood term, the probability that you would have seen what you did if the theory were true, by a prior probability theory. Hebb claimed that psychic or spiritual experience is not real. He said the probability is very low. And he went on to say, as the leading experimental psychologist of his time, he believed the likelihood terms are very good for parapsychology and psychic phenomena. He said these people have proven their claims with a higher degree of confidence than my colleagues do in other branches of psychology. However, he said, I still don't believe them because of the prior term, we know it's physically impossible. And that's what I personally did believe until I had no choice. Okay. And the bottom line is, in March of 1967, I had an experience which is described on my webpage and in papers I published in 2019. I had an experience which I simply could not reconcile with the theory that we are only brain. And it took a very incredible experience that I couldn't wiggle out of to make me open-minded. I didn't believe there was such a thing as psychic experience or soul at first. I simply said, I'm open-minded, I'm confused, I don't know what's going on, and I want to find out. So I learned a whole lot of physics. I took courses in quantum physics from Julian Schwinger, who was one of the founders of quantum field theory. So I have really looked into that math. And my conclusion at the end of the day, well, since 1972, I believe with 99% probability, yeah, this psychic spiritual stuff, there is something going on. And I didn't know what it was. And this was very frustrating to me. And I later checked and found I'm not the only one who had that kind of experience. Schrodinger, Heisenberg, de Broglie, and Dyson all support the existence of more than just the brain. I'm not the only one. And Greeley did a big study for the National Science Foundation and found that most elite PhDs in the US say they have had the kind of personal experience that was enough to convince them. Their experience wouldn't have convinced me. I was a tough nut to crack, but I was cracked. I had the experiences too. So the bottom line is, what are the implications? This is a conflict of such deep importance. If we believe that paranormal or spiritual experiences are real, but if we believe that everything is ruled by the laws of physics, how can we understand what's going on? Many people believe that quantum measurement, like Stapp's theory, can explain this stuff. Bottom line is, it can't. Anybody who thinks that Copenhagen physics measurement can explain psychic phenomena, they're wrong. They just don't know the physics. I call this looking for God in a pair of sunglasses. Polarized sunglasses are not the communication to the world of spirit or soul. They just don't work that way. After many years of trying to figure it out, I have found one and only one way to reconcile the physics with the personal experience. I was leading two lives, one life where I could jump over tall buildings and actually do weird stuff, and yet I had my physics. I can reconcile them. The only way to reconcile them, I know them, is what I call the noosphere species theory, which I published. It is like the noosphere theory of Desjardins, but Desjardins' theory does not work. I've spoken to high up members of Catholic theology who say, we used to believe this, but it doesn't work. It doesn't fit science. And the version from Desjardins does not fit science, but there's an alternative new version, the noosphere species theory, which does. And the basic idea is we don't have just one noosphere. We don't have one realm of spirit or thought. We have a whole cosmos full of them. We have a whole evolution in species. So this is the big picture. I've used this often in China. Maybe I should talk more about, I don't have time to talk about the whole politics of the universe, but let's just say we are part of a very large world. We come from a whole ecology of noospheres, and this fits. Carl Jung said we have a kind of collective unconscious, and I think that's true at this point. And because we are not only verbal thinkers, we need to integrate the images in our brain. After all, a mouse brain has images. It doesn't have words. 99% of our brain is based on images, for God's sake. So if we want to be coherent and sane, we have to integrate our images and our theories together. And I like to use these images to think about what our noosphere is like. And this has a lot of implications which can be tested, need to be tested. We don't have time to get into them today, but this stuff is really testable. The physics behind this is the physics of dark matter, which I should have mentioned. We now know that most of the mass energy of our universe is not the kind of matter we use in ordinary electronics. We know that the kind of matter that explains our brain is only a tiny fraction of the mass energy of the universe. We know that we live in a pulsing ocean or network of mass energy, and now we can take photographs. This is something new. We call this dark matter. I don't believe in any of the current theories of dark matter. It's not that, well, there's a lot that can be said about the physics, but I believe that we do have an ocean of energy and matter. And I believe that what we call our noosphere is really an organism made up largely of dark matter. This is the only explanation that fits, and it fits very well. So that's the basic idea, that we are part of a whole giant species of noospheres connected all across the cosmos. And finally, let me say there is a role for quantum theory here, not quantum measurement, but an understanding of what kind of universe we live in. There have been radical breakthroughs in real empirical quantum mechanics, like quantum computing, real electronics and photonics with quantum theory. And we have found that there are what they call microscopic Schrodinger cats. There are parallel copies of us. This affects what we can do with new technology. We can build new computers far more powerful than anything possible with classical computing or Turing machines. But my claim is that also affects our souls, that we ourselves are Schrodinger cats. And that's important to understanding our experience. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Paul. That was a great presentation.